If anyone is going to make the assumption that I might include this episode in my top 20 Beach City episodes list that I would have done for Summerpalooza 4, only to scrap it for just reviewing one episode from this show, I always look into all the critiques involving the bad episodes from this show. And to be perfectly real with you, I would never include this at all. And if I'm planning on doing a Steven Universe Marathon as part of Summerpalooza 5 next year, I wouldn't include this episode. Though then again, that's mainly debatable if I'm going to include the other bad episodes, but we're still here right now in September, and we still have a long way to get back into the following summer of next year. You know, when people say that Island Adventure is one of the worst episodes from this show, mainly when it comes to Sadie doing a toxic thing in order to put Lars on an island in order for him to change for the better, I think that in that episode, Sadie was just trying to make things right towards Lars, knowing forward that she has no other way to make things right for Lars. And when it comes to the point of this episode, since that Sadie learned more about Lars, maybe there's a reason onto why people have been going against Steven in this episode, in the same ways as Sadie from Island Adventure. During my binge watch of this show 3 years ago, I was planning on reviewing this episode as part of Cartoon Crisis 2, but I replaced it with Wagnado being a much more Warsaw episode than this. But considering I gave that episode a 3.75 out of 10, that rating has been changed into a lower rating, which is a 2.5 out of 10. So, if there's one thing I'm going to give, is that this episode is slightly better than Wagnado, but at the same time, I can instantly tell onto why people cannot stand this episode. The new Lars focuses on Steven being into Lars being in a romantic relationship with Sadie, but it's far from the case. And during that night, he has a dream while he gets close to Lars, and in the morning, he is taking full control of Lars' body while Lars is in Steven's body, but for the rest of the episode, up until the end, he doesn't appear, nor wakes up. And in all honesty, the Steven-only perspective in this episode sums up a lot on the fact that they just didn't know what to do with Lars up until the final minutes of this episode. So with Steven taking control of Lars' body, he sees what Lars' life is like, and to be perfectly real with you, I just don't understand how Steven has the ability to take control of someone else's body when this is the only episode that happens. Though granted, it may be debatable when he takes control of the Watermelon Stevens in episodes before, but considering that's mainly a different case since that the Watermelons, well, are watermelons and not actual human beings, not to be offensive towards Watermelon Stevens, but the fact that Steven has the ability to take control of Lars, it's a lot more effective when it comes to taking control of a human body. It just makes me more confused. Like, it's just really weird on the fact that the way Steven has these powers and the fact that he's in another person's body that is farther away from where he sleeps, I don't even get the connection. Even in Steven's dream, I just don't get it. Especially since that the fact that he is acting how he was in these episodes, I just don't understand what happened after everything of what Steven went through. And believe me, once we get into Sadie, you can understand onto why I prefer her actions in Island Adventure over Steven's actions in this. Now, I understand what this episode is trying to do. Doing a different direction involving a character being good in front of people who prefer him the new him rather than the old him. But the problem is that Steven is doing this in his own volition, and the fact that Lars isn't doing anything about it, since that he is in Steven's body, sleeping through the majority of this episode. You can't be able to do that for a person if you have the ability to take control of the bodies. Since that we got the good Lars in the following season, it really feels like that they're trying to execute Lars' character much more better, especially of what ended up happening after that episode. Because, to be perfectly real with you, the episodes involving Lars before this episode sums up a lot that when he does a good deed while understanding Steven, knowing full well that he insulted him when it comes to bringing up his mother, it really felt like development that showcases on Lars learning about Steven more. But considering that Island Adventure, along with this, came out after that episode, it made me convinced that they didn't know what to do with Lars in this, considering that out of all the Beach City citizens, Lars felt like the odd one out when it comes to him being mean in comparison to the other Beach City citizens. And while there's a chance I may talk about those episodes next year, keep in mind, this episode alone has none of those qualities or those types of developments when it comes to before and after. Mainly the fact that Steven is just going out of his way to make Lars a better person, and yet at the same time, even if this is supposed to be at a time where he's supposed to be joyful since that he's 14 years old but still really short, I don't even understand how he's taking any of this non-seriously. I've seen Steven going through so much situations in the past, and even though that in future episodes, mainly the Connie episodes, well, he gets abandoned by Connie after coming back on Earth, I just don't think that this is realistic for Steven to deal with if he ever had the ability to have body control towards someone else. Because for me personally, if he had the ability to do that, he would probably do the same thing with the other characters, mainly the Crystal Gems, and maybe Peridot and Lapis if he ever had the chance. So the fact that he's only doing this in this episode, even though he may did that involving the Watermelon Stevens, I just don't think that this is really possible. It just isn't possible for me to be convinced. Here's the main reason on to why Steven is worse in comparison to Sadie from Island Adventure, because even if you may say that Sadie was toxic in putting Lars into a predicament in Island Adventure, you need to understand that she was at least smart to think about it. It may not be a good way, but at the same time, she was just trying to make things right with Lars. But in this, since that Steven is being this decision on making things right with Sadie, the fact that he had the audacity to have Lars, mainly in Lars' body, say, "Because I love you," doesn't he really understand how love works? Like, I understand that his relationship with Connie isn't that physical when it comes to romantic relationships, but in all honesty, there is no other way you can convince me that anyone will be able to do this. Even if a child is in a grown man's body, well, not really a grown man's body, but in a teenage body like Lars. And the thing is, the way I see Sadie in this entire episode, it really shows that she's moved on after everything that she went through, especially off screen. And in all honesty, even if this episode was somewhat about to happen when it comes to this romantic relationship that Steven had in mind involving Lars and Sadie, I honestly felt like that if this episode actually focused on Lars and Sadie, it wouldn't be that interested. It wouldn't be that interesting, because in all honesty, if Steven wasn't in this episode, he wouldn't drive the plot forward, and I think that that's one of the reasons onto why the Steven-only perspective elements are still in this. Like, do you imagine Steven hanging out with Sadie and Lars in this without the moment of Lars saying, because I love you, because Steven isn't taking control of Lars' body, while also witnessing Lars and Sadie's relationship in reality rather than being stranded on an island? Like, I get it. Steven had hung out with Sadie and Lars in episodes before this. I get that. But when it comes to a relationship between Lars and Sadie, aside from the island adventure, well, it was in a serious predicament, it really feels like that Steven just didn't get it just when it comes to relationships from other people that he isn't accustomed to. And what I mean accustomed to is mainly the fact of how his relationship with the Crystal Gems are a lot more closer in comparison to other relationships outside of his life. And if this is the reason onto why the Steven only perspective thing is really common in this show, then that's either a good thing or mostly a bad thing. Because for me personally, sometimes I see it as a bad thing. But in this episode, it really feels like that without Steven, this episode wouldn't carry on its own. Which for me personally sums up a lot onto why people would prefer an episode involving other characters for a change rather than Steven himself. And the thing is that it just made me relate to Lars a lot more, considering that he isn't in this episode due to him taking control of Steven's body, who he is sleeping through the majority of this episode. Like, it really feels like that the Crewing Force want to fix the mistakes that they did in this episode by doing the good Lars and onwards to make Lars a much more better character. And even though that his space pirate bit didn't explore much, I can easily say that it was a better improvement over this. And with Steven being a much more bigger problem than Sadie from Island Adventure, it just made me convinced that this episode, where you take control of someone else's body, you can't always expect good things by making that person a better person, because if the bodies were transported back to the original forms, I'm pretty sure that everything will probably stay the same. Not improving whatsoever on the fact that your entire day inside of that person's body would mean anything when that person gets a hold of its own body back. You know, if we see Lars in Steven's body hanging out with the Crystal Gems, I think it would have been a lot more interesting to see how Steven's life is a lot more different when it comes to his relationship with the Crystal Gems. Though granted, considering that there were a few occasions where Lars see the Crystal Gems in scenarios, mainly when it comes to the Tiger Millionaire episodes, I'm starting to convince that Lars just doesn't take anything seriously when something serious is happening. Granted, it may be debatable, but at the same time, after his experiences in Island Adventure, well, that's literally the only episode where he is so panicking to the point that he's on an abandoned island. Maybe abandonment from family is literally the closest that he'll ever get, all the while being in a relationship with Sadie that just made the relationship a lot more difficult for him to be with Sadie in a romantic relationship. This episode really feels like it's trying to express on the fact that you can't have everyone be good, which includes people like Lars, and yet at the same time it's trying too hard to see that Steven is a better character over Lars, despite the fact that he put Lars in a predicament, well, he shouldn't be in the first place, considering that he shouldn't have these powers. But all I'm thinking is how is Steven having this power and not using it to his full advantage unless he's dreaming? Because for me personally, these ideals in mind, well, you have Steven have these powers, it just makes me question onto how Pink Diamond doesn't have any of those abilities against the other diamonds, or anyone else, since that she is the worst character in the entire show. So yeah, I can instantly tell onto why people cannot stand this episode and label it as one of the worst episodes in Steven Universe. Though granted, Ragnato is much worse than this, but at the same time, it really feels like that this episode tries way too hard, and yet at the same time, it really feels like that it just misses the point on Steven's abilities when it comes to him being a crystal gem. At times, it really feels like that in these Beach City episodes, his character either becomes good or bad, and for me personally, it's gonna take time for me to reconsider on doing these episodes for Summerpalooza 5 next year. But again, we still have 9 more months until June comes back. I'm giving this episode a 3 out of 10.